Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to open up the history books and talk about 4 key moments in Catholic and really European history that we thwarted the Muslims and what effect it had on Christendom. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio, et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. So we do have some videos here on history. We have a playlist on Catholic history, and there's a couple that we mentioned kind of tangentially, these topics. I do have an episode which I think is, I renamed it, but it's something like you piss on your ancestors by turning away your Christian faith. And I talk about like how our ancestors fought so many wars so they could continue the faith. The Christian, not even, Protestants can agree with this, especially before the 16th century, that we fought these wars against the infidel just to bequeath our faith, and now we're choosing to leave our faith. But I thought it'd be good to do kind of a Islam-inspired video, because look, I understand a lot of Catholics and a lot of Americans, we're woeful in history and in geography. I mean, we are woeful. So sometimes it's good to do a reminder of these things. So let's just kind of back it up. So Islam started with Muhammad receiving visions and from the angel Gabriel, and then he eventually wrote these things down. And then there was a lot of tumult in his life. We'll just keep it very vague here. But in the early 600s, the Muslim faith started to spread from Arabia very quickly. It went north to Iraq, and it went to the Holy Land, and then it spread through North Africa all the way around to Spain. And so this is where we get the first turning point, which is 732, the Battle of Tours, or the Battle of Poitiers. At this point, the Islamic forces, and this is going to be over here the Berbers. So Islam is not, it's a religion, submission to the will of God. It's not a race. So today you'll see like Malaysians are not anywhere ethnically close to Arabs, but they are Muslims. So you have Turks that are Muslims, you have Persians that are Muslims, you have Arabs that are Muslims, you have Berbers that are Muslims, you have Indians that are Muslims. So it's not a race, it's a religion. Either way, so Muslims came up through Spain. They conquered the Visigothic Catholic kingdom that was headquartered out of Toledo, and they were working their way up into France. At this time, France was under really the Merovingian kingdom that started really in the 500s with Clovis. Clovis was the first of the barbarians to adopt Catholicism. And at this time, of course, Catholicism, Christianity is hand in hand, because Catholicism is the only Christian faith. And at this point, you had Charles Martel, who later on was the grandfather of Charlemagne, the first, I guess you could say, great king of the West, thwarted back and pushed back the Muslims that were coming into southern France. They had already taken Spain, and we know through history that they would be there for another 700 years as what we call the Reconquista, as the small Catholic kingdom of the north over near Santander was able to push them back, and it took all the way to 1492 to eventually get the Muslims out of the Iberian Peninsula. But had the Muslims taken over southern France and won in that Battle of Tours, I mean, so much of it's like one of those great turning points. Like, what would have happened? Because this is in 700s, in the middle of what we call the Dark Ages. How European history be radically changed. But the Catholic forces were able to push them back. Let's fast forward 800 years. Let's go to 1529, the siege of Vienna. Now, Vienna was under siege a couple of times. This is the first major one. They were also under siege in the 1480s, but this is a big one because this is under Suleiman the Magnificent. He was probably the greatest Ottoman leader. Ottomans were a group of Muslims who overtook the Anatolia Peninsula, and eventually were the ones that had taken over and destroyed the Byzantine Empire in 1453. So at this point, they're moving in through the Balkans and into Eastern Europe, and they were making a move on Vienna. Vienna, of course, was run by the Habsburgs, and the Habsburgs ran Vienna in the Austrian area and all the neighboring kingdoms for about 700 years. but this is in the 1500s. So this is simultaneous to the exploration of the New World, and we have Charles V, who's actually in charge of both Spain, the New World, and Austria and the Low Countries. And Suleiman brought 100,000 forces in the summer of 1529, really in the fall of 1529, to try to overtake Vienna. And through the concerted efforts of only 22,000 soldiers to hold off 100,000, Vienna was not conquered at that point, and they were able to push it back, and Suleiman had to retreat. Later on, Suleiman's successor, we have the Battle of Lepanto. A lot of Catholics do know about the Battle of Lepanto, and the interesting thing is there's a lot of great books that talk about this kind of battle between Islam and the Catholic kingdoms from about 1500s to 1700s. But the Battle of Lepanto is famous because this was a naval battle that happened on the outskirts or on the western coast of Greece, and at this point, the Muslims had taken essentially the whole eastern side of the Mediterranean. The Catholic kingdoms had the western side. The Ottomans had taken Cyprus. They had taken Rhodes, which was a big thing. They had all the Greek islands. They had Greece, and there was a big siege in Malta, which eventually the Catholic forces were able to push them back. But Lepanto was a big thing. So on the Catholic side, we had a kind of the Catholic League. It was a unified league between Venice and Spain, and of course the Papal States and some other kingdoms. It was led by Don Juan, who was the illegitimate son of Charles I, who we just mentioned. And the Catholic fleet was vastly outnumbered. And at this time, St. Pius V was our Pope, and he asked the whole Christian world to pray, in particular pray rosaries. And we were able to win that naval victory. It was a gigantic defeat, and this is where we get Our Lady of the Rosary, which is celebrated on the day of Battle of Lepanto in October. And Pope Pius V had a premonition that they had won. That's one of the stories. And there's a reason. He was only a pope for like 5 years, but he did so many things. He revised the Missal, for example. That's another thing that he did. And it was a gigantic victory. Now, it didn't mean that it was the end of Ottoman peril. But destroying their fleet was a big thing. But within a couple of years, the Ottomans had rebuilt their fleet. But it was more of a significant kind of moral victory, and it unified the Catholic kingdoms. Because had they won, had they destroyed the Catholic naval fleet of these different countries, they would have gotten control and had easy access to the Italian peninsula, and they could have easily sacked Rome, and therefore it could have gone really bad from there. And then the last one we have is 1683, the Second Battle of Vienna. This was a big one. Now this is, looking back, it was past the peak of Ottoman hegemony, but at the time, the Battle of, so they invaded Vienna, and I forgot something about 1529 at the Battle of the Siege of Vienna the first time, but the Ottomans had beaten and destroyed Hungary. They killed the Hungarian king, and so amongst the kind of civil war in Hungary, one side supported the Austrian king, and the other one supported kind of a local Hungarian leader. And the local and Hungarian leader, not too smart, but probably for political expedience, went to the Ottomans at the time, Muslim Ottomans, and asked for their support. But you saw this later on too. A lot of people don't know this, but in the 16th century, France, under Francis and Henry II, were allies of the Ottoman Empire. And this is one of those things that, like you would see Otto von Bismarck talk about with Ostpolitik and Realpolitik, how at this point, and certainly I think you see this really played out in the 30 Years' War, where you saw eventually Catholic kingdoms fighting against each other instead of fighting the Protestants, where you have a Catholic kingdom, a stalwart Catholic kingdom in the Kingdom of France, allying themselves with the Ottomans simply because of their hatred for the Habsburgs in Spain and Austria. Either way, so fast forwarding back to 1683, this was a massive siege on Vienna that imperiled Vienna, and it looked like Vienna and the Habsburg king they were going to be toppled, but you had the Polish king Sobieski come in riding on his white horse and rescuing and relieving Vienna and able to push the Ottomans back. And that was really the last time that you saw the Ottomans really having any meaningful, attack or invasion of Europe. Now, the irony is that a lot of our European ancestors fought hard and these 4 separate occasions and other battles that we haven't mentioned, to keep Islam out of Europe. But if you know anything what's going on with immigration of Europe, there's tons of Muslims in Europe. And I'm not necessarily going to hate all Muslims that live in Europe, but you see this, even most recently played on the World Cup, that when Morocco beat Belgium, there were Moroccans who live in Belgium and Holland that were rioting out of celebration. But this goes back to the question I did on that video that I did in Florence about how Europe is mission territory, because Europe has turned their back on Christian values, the values that made Europe great, and they contracept and abort themselves out of extinction. They have a negative birth rate. And you see the Muslims across the pond from Mediterranean, and in the Muslims that are in Germany. The Turks moved in the 1950s. And if you guys go to Europe, you can see there's quite a bit of Muslims there. And just look at demographics, look at the numbers. And it's just kind of sad in that you see that their European forefathers fought so hard to fight the enemy that is Islam, and now it's the demographics are probably eventually going to win out, and Islam might become preponderant in Europe and give it a couple of more decades and so forth. And again, this is not to hate on Muslims. There are very good Muslim people, but the ideology of Islam, of the Intifada, of the war is. It's as you see throughout their history, it's conversion by conquest, whether it be outright conquest or other ways of conquest. And I mean, it is a clash of civilization, and the West is weak. The West is weak, a lot because we've turned against our Christian values, and who knows what's going to happen here. But I wanted you to know, just know these 4 turning points in European history at a time when the Catholics rallied to protect Europe from Islam, because this would be a radically different world if you look at what European values in terms of freedom and in terms of international law and philosophy and literature and all these things could have been radically changed had the Catholic bulwark not thwarted Islam on these several occasions. So we have to give praise and glory to God for our ancestors who did these brave and valiant things and sacrificed their lives for this. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.